you don't get to have your lovely Ultima 3 and Questron.
The other day I was trying to explain to my nephews what it was like getting my first computer in 1983. Back then I got a Commodore 64 and it wasn't like the experience you have today. So let's take a look at what I and other people went through back in the day just so we could own one of these machines for the very first time. A couple of months after I graduated from high school in 1982, Commodore released the Commodore 64.
In January 1982, the Commodore 64 personal computer was introduced with a 64K built-in memory for under $600. So to stay even with Commodore in memory and price, IBM will have to slash its price, quadruple its memory. Apple will also be faced with a sizable chore, and so will Atari. As Shearson American Express put it, the Commodore 64 could be the microcomputer industry's outstanding new product introduction since the birth of the industry.
With its heretofore unheard of sound and graphic capabilities, this machine felt like such a huge step forward in computer technology. But to my 18-year-old self, the $595 price tag felt like $1 million. By the summer of 1983, I was going through serious computer withdrawal. In high school, I was secretary of the computer club and spent a great deal of time during school and after programming on the Apple II Pluses in the lab. Now I had no access to computers, unless you want to count the ones I was plunking quarters into on a regular basis. Then, in the summer of 1983, I saw an ad in the paper from Bi-Mart, a local membership store, that the Commodore 64 was on sale for $220.
Only Commodore can give you a computer as powerful as the Commodore 64. For a price as low as the Commodore 64.
I had been saving for a year from my part-time job at a local hobby store, but I was still about $100 short of the new lower price. So I hatched a plan to convince my grandparents that this mere $220 machine would be a critical part of my education. I spun a tale about the future, the places of computers in it, and how understanding of computers would be necessary to succeed in life.
Understanding of what, Master? Digital watches. And soon I shall have understanding of videocassette recorders and car telephones. And when I have understanding of them, I shall have understanding of computers. And when I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being.
To my surprise, I met little resistance and they agreed to cover the shortfall. It seemed that my educational future was assured. Funny thing is, I never really learned much from that computer, unless you want to count computer hardware architecture, assembly language programming, and how an operating system actually works. So the only thing I really remember about that day when I finally became a computer owner was that it seemed to take forever to finish the paperwork and get my Bi-Mart card so that I could buy the computer. And yeah, I probably could have waited for my mom to come home and have her take me to get it, but that would have meant even more waiting. Finally, the paperwork was done, and I had my shiny new machine in my grubby little hands, and I managed to lug it the 5 blocks home on my bike. Not everybody had the same experience I did getting their first computer. For instance, my best friends, Tom and Shaun, had a completely different experience, but why don't I let them tell you about it?
So I'm Tom Ebling.
I'm Shaun Ebling.
My very first computer was a Commodore 64. I had it for a very brief amount of time. I had gone to Sears, got my very first credit card, and so I was just perusing through their electronics section, and I was looking in this big glass case that had the computer there for the C64. And lo and behold, it had Ultima 3, that cover with the big demon on the front, and another game called Questron. And I was just like, oh, I have to have this. And so I said, hey, can you pull this out so I can take a look at the back of it? And I'm looking at the back and I'm seeing, those amazing old Ultima pixels looking at me. And I said, well, how much is this system? And it was probably $800 at the time or something for everything, but I ended up purchasing that, but I couldn't take it home because Mom and Dad had said, hey, you have to save your money for college You can't be buying any of this stuff right now. So I took it to Shaun's house. We put it in her bedroom, set up the hard drive, got Ultima playing right off the bat, and we're playing, and we're having a great old time for a good 2 weeks. And it was just amazing. I loved it. And the unfortunate thing is I got suckered just like everybody else in the world was, do you want a service contract with that? And my name is the same as my father's. And so instead of sending the service contract stuff to me, they sent it to my dad. So my dad said, hey, what are you doing? You weren't supposed to buy that. You have to give it, you have to take it back. Take it back to the store. You don't get to have your lovely Ultima 3 and Questron. So I had to take it back, and I'll never forget, he's filling out the return form, and on the reason why he wrote in big capital letters, parents said no, exclamation, exclamation. And so I never got to see another Commodore 64 until Mike gave me one of his restored C64. So it's been 30, 40 years since I've been able to touch a Commodore 64 again, and it's all because I wasn't very smart about how I attained it. It could have all been.
Bought the service contract.
Yeah, anytime someone says, would you like the service contract, sir? It's like, no. The manufacturer's got a 90-day warranty. That's good enough for me.
I just remember the music on the game. We were humming it because it was...
Yeah, the Ultima music, yeah. Over and over and over again. Something like that.
Maybe I should have been more understanding, but I was having none of that.
Man, that would have sucked. Once I got my Commodore 64 home, I set it up in the bedroom that I shared with my brother, using an old black and white TV set as the monitor. This is where things got interesting. While I now had my very first computer and I could program on it in BASIC, there was no way to load a program other than with the keyboard, and once one was typed in, there was no way to save it to load later. So what we ended up doing is leaving the computer on 24/7. Now, the internet was still just a gleam in DARPA's eyes at the time. In fact, it was in 1983 that TCP/IP became the standard on ARPANET, the predecessor to the internet, but I knew nothing of that at the time. There was one way I knew of to get programs for my new computer, and so I headed back to Weimar to get a computer magazine. Because back in the day, these magazines were loaded with lots and lots of programs that you could type in yourself. I settled on Compute's Gazette because it focused on Commodore and it had a lot of listings in every issue. In fact, this is issue 1, number 1, and this came out the same month that I got my computer. Typing in the program listing was a pain and error prone. Often my sister would read off lines to me. I would type them in, then read them back to her to make sure they were correct.
Print, quote, bracket, WHT, close bracket.
Once we had the program typed in and debugged, then the real fun began. My brother, sister, and I had hours of fun playing these simple games without having to plink a quarter for each one. I didn't realize it then, but this was happening all over the world, and I believe it had a big part in the arcade amusement crash later that year. Sometimes we'd leave the computer on for a week or longer so we could continue to play the game. Occasionally the power would go out and we'd lose the program. At the time, I suspected that the power would occasionally fail when one of my siblings got bored of the program we were using, but they don't have any recollection of it, and I have no doubt they would fess up if they had.
This game didn't look like a lot of fun. Maybe something different.
I think that was the final straw that led to the acquisition of a tape drive. I bought a new Commodore C2N tape drive for about $50, either in December of '83 or maybe January '84. Now we could save those typed in programs for later use and debugging. More importantly, I could save my own creations, allowing for much more sophisticated programs created over multiple sessions. A dataset saves and loads data at about 100 bytes per second. So the only record it's going to break is longest time to load a single program. But it was still a game changer. I mean, literally, it let us change games. Now that we had basically unlimited data storage, the ability to use this computer was magnified exponentially. And it was at this point that some of the projects that I created over the years became possible, like my game, DDM. Getting my first computer had a dramatic effect on my life, but that effect spilled over into the lives of my family. I talked with my sister about that sometime last year.
Well, what was your fondest memory of the old computers?
I remember you teaching me to do some very basic programming, to program like a simple text adventure. That was pretty cool. Like, blew me away that I could write a game.
I think I learned more about basic programming, fixing the bugs in the magazines, because I didn't want to wait till the next month.
When they'd print the corrections.
And oddly enough, I don't think there's any corrections in this, but this is literally issue 2.
Oh, wow. And 83, so I was 13 that year, you were 19?
Yep, I did get the machine in June or July.
Oh, wow. I don't remember specific games, but I remember I liked playing the text adventures.
Like Zork.
Yeah.
The Infocom stuff, those were fun.
I mean, we went at teenagers where we could type in these basic games to play, and now I teach from my computer all day, every day.
So when I joined the Army, that was 85. And you were the caretaker of my Commodore 64.
Yep, when you left your 64 with me and went to Germany, Centipede is what I remember playing a lot of.
It was a good excuse to buy a Commodore 120.
Right.
My sister needs it. And it took me forever to figure out what happened to it. Then when I was digging, I was in an Amiga user group, and I found the old newsletters. And in one of the newsletters is a classified ad from me that's titled Selling My Firstborn.
One thing I find very common in people's tales about getting their first computer is that they tended to have to really stretch the pocketbooks to be able to make it happen. For the next person, that's true as well, but in the end, they made a very nice living from it.
In a former life, I was the owner president of CompuSave, and also in Europe we were known as Pulsar. We were sellers of Commodore machines and developers of software, hardware, worldwide. It's a long time ago, though. In the very beginning, when we got our Commodore, we bought it. It was like, I think it was like $700 or $800 for the machine. We turned in our Pong set, and we got $300 for it. And we got the Commodore 64. It's very hard for people with cell phones today to appreciate what we went through in the very beginning. With my Commodore 64, I couldn't wait to go upstairs. I was upstairs in my house. I had my own little computer room. I couldn't wait to load Missile Command and Frogger and all these. And to this day, one of my favorite games to play is Missile Command. I cannot play the new games because you literally have to have 12 hands and dexterity, which at this age I don't have that dexterity. Where I play with my nephews. I mean, I can't even see his hands moving, and he's kicking and chopping and shooting and killing.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
The Commodore 64, now in a home family pack. A family pack containing the world's #1 selling home computer, a data cassette and joystick, a comprehensive teach-yourself program, plus 3 additional software packages. The Commodore family pack now available from your Commodore dealers and major retail stores. Now that's value for money.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
I used to like the days where you used to have to Frogger and Missile Command and also Jungle Hunt and all those fun games where I'd get off the train in the city. They had these big arcades, and if you showed them your ticket, you got a token to play the games because they wanted people to come in. And my wife would show her ticket, give me her token, and she'd walk downtown to her job. I would have 2 tokens, and I would play, again on these big arcade machines, Missile Command or Frogger or these other ones. The very basic of the beginning of the games. But to me, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. But the kids today, I don't think they would appreciate those games Yeah, so I got into the business by accident. In the very beginning of Commodore, when Commodore first came out, you had Commodore 64. It was the forerunner of the PET. So it's really kind of amazing. So, I was into all of that kind of stuff. And then to run software on your original Commodore 64, there was no software, zero. You used to have a cassette player, and you had to run a piece of software on the cassette player called a PET emulator. And you'd run the emulator, and what it would do is you could run PET software on a Commodore 64. Most of us in the beginning we became programmers because there was a lack of programming. And what ended up happening is that I'm self-taught. I taught myself basic C machine language too. And what ended up happening is that I ended up starting a user group called the Commodore Long Island Club. It was Click. And we started with people, and before I put ads in the paper with my own money, and all of a sudden, before you know it, there were a bunch of Commodore people that were meeting at my house, and they got too big. So I called up my local community. We had a school that wasn't being used, and I said, can I borrow, one of the rooms, a large room for meetings? And they said, sure. By the time the year was over, we had over 400 families. We had 600 people coming to meetings. Wow. We had a board of directors. We had people teaching basic classes, teaching uses of using the computer because no one knew anything. We had user groups. And there was also a group in the city that I belonged to called NICIG, which wasn't necessarily Commodore. It was a computer group because there were computers, Eagle, Osborne. There was a million different types of computers at that time. And there was also 10 different types of DOS. Originally, we had 300 board. Everyone had BBSs, bulletin board systems for those that don't know. BBSs were started. There was a 300 baud modem, which is horribly slow, but it was super fast for us because we had nothing else. The beginning of the computer revolution really was the wild, wild west. That's what I like to call it because everything was so different.